Delighted to welcome you to our 9th annual conference today. And as you would have gathered from the documentation you have received, we'll be mainly looking at how we have been engaging in collaboration with several organizations over time, particularly from the voluntary sector. We are, hoping we'll hear a lot of feedback from what we are going to share. We are also hoping that we will learn a lot from the audience, because we don't want to give, we also want to receive, and it has to go both ways. But before we start, let me do some sort of housekeeping. We are not expecting some sort of fire alarm or fire safety and so forth, but in case we have a fire, obviously you can see the exits, so they are indicated. So we have all to go and meet at the car park, I think in front of the building. So go across and then you follow us. There are a few of us with, I don't know even where I put my tag, but there are a few fire wardens in the room, including myself. So you follow us and then we. So can I also ask you to make sure your mobiles are off? Yeah, just in case they start ringing. Yeah, and obviously the facilities. For people who are in the room here, the toilets are downstairs. So there is a lift to take you downstairs. Otherwise, you can use the steps the way you came in. There is also another set of steps around the corner. For the people who are joining us online, just be aware that this event is being recorded. Yeah, so your cameras and microphones are disabled. And if there are any issues around accessibility, there are a few things you can do on Microsoft Teams to get the subtitles and so forth. So please do use those facilities if needed. We have an email just in case you want to reach out to us. It's OUBS hyphen events@open.ac.uk. And if there is any problem, obviously you get back to us. In terms of taglines, obviously, it's a CVSL Conf 2025. And remember to tag the Open University Business School, OUB School on X if you do it. So there you are. And without further ado, I think I'll ask Keith to come and open the conference.
Thank you, Fidele, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Open University. Thank you for joining us here on campus, and those of you online as well. Really pleased to be able to be here to celebrate the Open University Business School Centre for Voluntary Sector Leadership at what's the 9th annual conference. My name's Keith Schofield, and I'm the head of the Open University Business School, and I'm really proud to work with academic colleagues who are committed to the open mission of the Open University to be open to people, places, methods, and ideas. And I think the boundary spanning activity that goes on, certainly in the Centre for Voluntary Sector Leadership, really sort of epitomises that. I'd like to start just by thanking and highlighting friends and partners of the centre. So the Henry Smith charity, our local friends from the MK Community Foundation as well, and all of the organisations who have contributed to our research, provided case studies, provided challenge, provided opportunities for discussion, and provided platforms. They've all, in some ways, shaped our learnings and shaped our impact, and we're grateful for that. We've designed today to be a space to provide opportunity for discussion and collaboration and engagement. So please use it to create value for yourselves, for your organisations, and to help to shape and future-proof some of the ideas that we're working on in the centre. We really want you to think about how the OU, how the business school, how the centre can contribute to the betterment of the voluntary sector that we're so intertwined with. There are lots of exciting themes throughout the day. So you'll be hearing about research which is leading in areas of ethical leadership, in voluntary sector leadership, around impact of working locally, around local procurement principles, public infrastructure, and partnering. And partnering is a theme that I think we'll return to time and time again, because many of the relationships that you will hear about today are all have been enabled through partnership, through identifying mutual benefit from relationships, and these are what have contributed to the research that we're developing. Volunteering, as you know, at its core is around electing to make contributions to organisations, that you subscribe to a mission, subscribe to a purpose, and that we've got such dedication and commitment to a sector that is a real sort of a public and societal and civic societal movement is I think really profound. I was reminded last night of a great quote from the late great Margaret Mead, which was that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. And I think that's something that pervades a lot of what this sector stands for. Thank you finally to those involved in organising and shaping today. I hope it will be, I'm sure it will be enjoyable for everybody, whether you're in the room or zooming into us. But I hope everyone's able to contribute and to shape the discussions. We want to take the opportunity to pause and to reflect, and we're grateful that you're here, that you might benefit from and showcase our partnership. I'll be in and out throughout the day, so please do come and say hello. I'd really love to learn more about your own stories and how your contributions to our centre has really helped us progress. So thank you. I will pass on to Steve, I think.
Good morning to those of you who are here and those of you who are online, and a warm welcome from me too. So let me see if I can navigate this. So I've been given the opportunity to reflect a little bit on the CVSL journey in a more general sense. Fidele, our director, asked me to do this. Whether I'm going to say what he thought I would say is a different matter altogether, but we'll soon see. So the CVSL was officially launched in 2016, but I'd like to actually go back a bit further than that, because of course the university's commitment to the voluntary sector and my own commitment started long before CVSL was born. And for me, I think it really started when I came to Scotland as a student from Norway, where, I mean, Norway is an oil-rich nation. And I was struck by the poverty that was so visible in Scotland. And I was struck by the inequality that I saw, and in particular children living in poverty. And I was really shocked that that was happening in the UK. Probably said more about my naivety than anything else, I guess. But to sort of fast forward a couple of years, when I did my MSc and later my PhD at the university, I had the opportunity to work with the Poverty Alliance, which is an alliance of more than 100 organizations, still exists, and mostly voluntary sector organization, public sector organizations as well. And the work I did with them was to try and understand how or learn about how voluntary sector organizations collaborate. And what I learned through those 4 or 5 years set the foundation for what later became the theory of collaborative advantage, which we have drawn on as we developed CVSL. But I was full of admiration for the work that this sector did and still do. Unfortunately, the need is still there. So I joined the OU in 2002, and at that time we had formal curriculum, accredited curriculum that was specifically targeted at the voluntary sector, not-for-profit sector. We had, for example, the certificate, non-for-profit certificate, which was the precursor to the MBA, which I chaired at the time, and that was great. But then as we know, things changed, and around about 2010, I think, the financial situation was such that the curriculum that the OU was offering specifically to the sector was no longer financially viable. So we had to think about doing something else. It was devastating for especially for my colleagues in the Department for Public Leadership and Social Enterprise, which is where CVSL is located and which I headed up at that time. And my boss at that time, Professor Professor Taylor, Rebecca, I do remember the conversation very vividly because she said, "Steve, you got to do something for the voluntary sector." I'm like, "Okay, what?" She said, "Anything, just do something." And so the thinking cap had to come on for myself and others, because of course the OU and the mission is to be open to people, places, methods and ideas, and to provide access to education for anyone and everyone, regardless of where you are and what sector you're working in. And so the fact that we that we no longer had this curriculum was a challenge that we had to address. And so we came up with a proposal, and we were very lucky to receive funding for 3 years for what was an academic center for excellence, which was supposed to, or which brought together research, informal learning and knowledge exchange for the private, for the voluntary sector, smaller organizations in particular. So it was that combination of what we saw as a need in the voluntary sector, where I think this is still the case. There is still a need for affordable, appropriate access to leadership development, leadership around collaboration and so on. So that's what we set out to do, born out of a challenge. So reflecting on the journey, well, I think the thing that characterizes the journey over the last 9 years is undoubtedly the collaboration, the partnership, the commitment, the values that we share with the sector around the importance of the work that we do. There is a passion there that keeps us going. We understand, CVSL understand, smaller voluntary sector organizations understand what it feels like to be strapped for cash, and how you need to work in ways that enable you to nevertheless carry on. So I think that's what we have done. We've carried on, and we might come back to a little bit more around how we've carried on if there is time. But I wanted to draw your attention to formal reflection that we have done recently, led by Carol Jacklin-Jarvis, who was one of our directors. I should have said, by the way, that when we set up CVSL, we also wanted to have funding for a chair with voluntary sector leadership. But the funding actually stretched to us developing 2 online educational resources on leadership development and collaborative leadership. It stretched to 2 PhD students, and it stretched to a senior fellow, James Rees, who is still here with us today. Thank you. And I became the director for CVSL initially, although my expertise is in interorganizational collaboration as opposed to voluntary sector. But I have always been involved in the voluntary sector one way or another, and been surrounded by people who are expert in the sector, which is great. And so I started, and then James took over, and then James handed over to Carol at some point along the line, and now we have Fidele. So it's very much a sort of a collaborative journey, this CVSL journey. But the formal reflection that we did is in form of a publication in the Journal of Public Affairs Education, and it asked the questions about, well, what have we learned about developing informal leadership for the sector, and 5 themes came out of this, which I will just do very, very quickly. Now, one is about the extent to which, through the kind of educational sources that we have created, to what extent do we meet the needs of the sector? So thinking in particular about those 2 initial courses that are developed for online study only, without any support from a tutor. They are sitting on the Open Learn platform, which is free to access for anyone, right? Thinking about those, to what extent did those meet the need of the sector? So we know that more than 20,000 people have visited those courses, but we don't know how those people have engaged with the courses. We don't have that information. But I think suffice to say, from the feedback that we have, we feel that our learners have learned something about our notion of leadership, which is very much about collaborative, collective, shared leadership, as opposed to leadership being the one individual from the top. So not heroic leadership. And so we think we've done that. But what we also learned from feedback, in particular from organizations and so on, is that there is need for more targeted learning around leadership development in the sector. But of course, that's a lot more costly to develop. So that led to the need to adapt, reuse and innovate around those original courses, which we did around creating events, facilitation, learning clubs led by Fidele, for example, that we had the funding to be able to use those courses in a different way. Undoubtedly, with more funding, we would have done more of that sort of targeted learning, but that's where we are. And that led to, for example, the Black Leadership Empowerment Programme, which Fidele will be talking about in the afternoon for anyone who's interested. A third theme is around relationship and collaboration. I think what keeps us going is this community of practice that we have, right, which comprises students, fellows, staff, individuals who have joined us as fellow and then become staff, and individuals who joined us as staff and then became fellows, our PhD student, current and past. You know, we're all here together, and many of you from the sector as well. And together we make this community of practice, whereby even if we are strapped for capacity, strapped for resources and so on, we have the opportunity to learn together. And I think that's one of the key things that keeps us going. The fact that also the material that we put online, that the open educational resources have something called a Creative Commons license to them, which means that people can use them, tweak them as long as they accredit the Open University, and use them in whatever way suits their development. And of course, we don't know what's happening to those. So we can just hope that we continue to have impact and continue to meet a need. Of course, the institutional and external context is as difficult as it was when we started CVSL. It's more difficult. It's become even more strapped for resources, both the voluntary sector and higher education, which means that squeeze leads us to needing to innovate all the time. I think the fact that CVSL is quite small enables us to be agile and enables us to pick up on whatever opportunities and make the most of those opportunities in a shared way. And of course, what we learn also feeds back into our accredited curriculum. So some of us are involved in writing a new course on leadership, an undergraduate level 2 program. Many of the stories that we hear, the cases that we study, feed back into that curriculum. So though it's not targeted specifically at the voluntary sector, students who happen to work in the voluntary sector or want to work in the voluntary sector will be able to recognize some of themselves in that material. So that is good. And finally, sustainability. So inevitably, there have been compromises along the way. You know, you get funding, you do what the funding requires you to do. That takes your effort away from other things that you would rather have done. But we're still here. And I think it's important to recognize that I believe that we're still providing something that others do not, simply because it's free, it's open, it's accessible. And that is quite unique. Other providers in this ecosystem of learning are not doing it that way. But at the same time, it's the purpose, the mission that's important. Being sure that we are able to do research, teaching and knowledge exchange that is relevant to the sector. And if that means that we keep CVSL as it is, or we tweak it along the way, I think that is a challenge for our director and whoever is going to follow you next, Fidele, in your directorship. So that's probably about 50% of what I wanted to say, but I've used up my time now, I think. So I think I'm passing on to somebody who's doing something online. Fidele? Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah. So I'm back again. Sorry. I think you'll get tired of me coming and going from the podium. So I'm delighted to welcome Tia-Zakura very shortly. She'll be joining us virtually. It's an interesting story because as we'll be discussing very shortly, we'll be talking about a new program we have been involved in over the last number of months, thanks to the partnership with Henry Smith Charity. So a couple of weeks ago, not even 4 weeks, I went around. I did a tour of the country of the 4 nations. So I went around England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And then when I was in our office in Cardiff, I met Tia, and obviously we started talking. So Tia happens to be an author. And I said, maybe you should do something at the conference. It's okay for people to come and hear from academics, but sometimes we need to hear from real people who are actually benefiting from some of the work we are doing. So then Tia volunteered, or was volunteered, to write a poem for us today. And, so she will introduce herself and she will share with us the poem she has composed for the day. Over to you, Tia.
Hello, hi everyone. Can you hear me okay over there? Yeah, perfect. So yeah, as Fidele said, thank you for introducing me. My name's Tia. Yeah, I'm based in Cardiff, and I am currently coming from this from a different angle. So I'm currently studying in the Minority Ethnic Leadership Programme, and yeah, so we got chatting, and Fidele kind of was like, "You're gonna write a poem for the conference." So yeah, I'll give it a go. I don't know how often you get sort of poetry and things like that at these sorts of things. So we'll see what happens. But I basically just took inspiration on how I actually didn't choose to go to university like when I left my A-levels because of sort of not seeing a space for me. And then this program, even though it's still early days in it, has been able to give me a tailored sort of approach to leadership and just getting the first steps back into what my learning journey might look like. So this poem is called I Want to Be. When I was 6, I told my dad I want to be a rock star. When I was 7, I told my dad I want to be a nurse. When I was 9, I told my dad I want to be a teacher. No, a head teacher, a CEO. Actually, I want to be a journalist, a speaker. I was 10 and I said I want to be the Prime Minister. I suppose my desire to boost change birthed from a background of noose change and a life of loose change. Age came with stresses. My guess is that as I grew some more, I saw the gruesome wars, the laws, and thought, I gotta do some more. The world peeled back its layers as my life lost years, and I saw the core, how it burns all things good and bad. I'm glad my dad told me the truth. Go, he said, but no, there's a lot of people out there who won't like you or the things that you'll do. True, his statement quickly became, and of course my goals didn't exactly stay the same. I studied politics but refrained from any of the game, pursued a sector where my name didn't appear untamed, where Adwa and Wizini didn't ruffle feathers with its cultural resonance. I still wanted a voice, but I'd been presented with what seemed a choice of being the only or the many. And they both came with plenty of downsides. Besides, I never saw the people on the TV screens who looked like me, never had a head teacher show my ABCs in an accent, please, never saw politicians see the things I see. Why would I want to be the things I don't see for me? See, we're not nattering when we say representation matters. In honesty, our policy makers' lack of it shatters dreams of a 10-year-old who wants to be a leader, leaves her with thoughts that she could never be that. I see that happening with youngsters still. It's the #1 cause of goals killed, and here we have a chance to learn the skills to overcome it and reach the summit. I'm not talking hills, we're walking still, but it's a movement as well. For Henry Smith and Fidele, with the creation of MEL, has meant so many other people like myself begin the journey towards standing firmly in our sectors. Expect us to rise into the leaders that we were meant to be all our lives. With the support from our tutors, we're fostering a future for marginalised groups to have a say and create. With collaboration, bring business education to the forefront, addressing underrepresentation, bridging the gap, tackling the lack. In fact, more than that. We're here to combat the barriers head on, feel huge ripple effects both inside and out, development being paramount, partnerships being found. But what I want to shout about is how that little black girl whose dreams to lead felt so out of reach is learning to learn, learning to teach herself about the ways to work effectively and connect with the people who will correct faulty systems so we have equal visions for our leaders, teachers, and politicians. My teacher told me my grades were wasted for not going to university, but I never saw a course that was made for me, so I gratefully share the experience that you gave to me, paid for me. Maybe we will be the ones to show the next generation that they can be the leaders that they are made to be. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's for the people who ask me what keeps me going. It's stories like those ones. And you know, so over the last 4 weeks, we have received so many of them. And that's what makes me say, okay, so maybe I'm here on a mission. And the mission is literally to create opportunities for people like Tia. So now what we are going to do is we are going to move stage. We are going to sit, and I'm going to have a dialogue, a conversation with Anand and Ian, and Steve will be leading the Q&A afterwards, and then we have a coffee thereafter. Okay, do you want to come on stage? Okay, so what we are going to do is, you know, I'm not, we did not ask people to give their biographies at the beginning. So to start with, I'm going to go around and I'm going to ask Anand and Ian to introduce themselves. So Anand, can you introduce yourself?
Okay, very, very happy to. So, so my name is Anand Shukla. I'm the Chief Executive of Henry Smith Charity, and I've been in that role for 3 years. Henry Smith Charity is a very long-established, almost 400-year-old charitable foundation that gives money to a range of social welfare causes and programs and organisations throughout the UK. We're going to be launching a new strategy in the next month. Part of that strategy is going to be a focus on leadership and management development in UK civil society, which is why I'm here and why we have funded the Minority Ethnic Leadership Programme, which we just saw that amazing poem. An example of you know, kind of just some of the amazing talent out there that we're looking to support. And before that, I've spent 20 years working in a range of roles in the charity sector, both service delivery and mentoring. And I worked with the OU over many years as well, and they're one of my favourite organisations. If there's an organisation out there that's done more to promote social mobility in this country or wider, I'd love to meet them.
Thank you. Ian, over to you.
Yes, so Ian Revell, I'm Chief Exec of the Milton Keynes Community Foundation, which is a place-based philanthropy organisation that gives money just to the city of Milton Keynes. I've been in my role, following your lead, for about 9 years, but before that I worked for over 15 years at the YMCA in Milton Keynes, trying to turn it from a set of buildings into a set of programs that supported young people change their lives. And I've taken that into the Community Foundation, because what we need to do in the Community Foundation in Milton Keynes is reflect the needs of our city in all of its wonderful diversity. And in Milton Keynes, it's changing rapidly in a fantastic manner. And yet the organisation was created by the founding mothers and fathers of the city and the Development Corporation, and their views are somewhat out of date. So we need to bring it up to date, and we need to make sure that we're giving money and support to organisations that are the future rather than past.
Thank you, Ian, and come back to you. Mia referred to, Tia referred to the Learning Hub. That's what I was doing in Cardiff when we met a couple of weeks ago. The idea actually was developed and nurtured in Milton Keynes. This is a while back, so we're talking about 2018. So Ian, you are here, I'm not putting you on the spot. So, can you tell us why you felt the need to invest your time in the pilot learning hubs which you run on leadership development? Yeah. This would be, 2018. And in particular, tell us if you saw any change in terms of leadership practice by some of those people who participated in the program.
Okay, so is my microphone working?
Yes, it is.
It is. Okay, that's good. That's good. So for a philanthropy organisation, the way it works is that donors, individuals, corporates will give you money that you want to invest in some sort of community change. And that's brilliant. But if you can't give grants to organisations that deliver that change, it somewhat breaks the model. And so you need organisations that can write good applications and, more importantly, create outstanding community life-changing projects. And when everything is done on a shoestring, as that is often the case in the voluntary sector, you're finding that the one person's doing everything. And they don't have enough time to invest in their own leadership, their own thinking. You just need to look at my inbox, and it's screaming at you all the time. So when do I get time to think and learn? So you have the resources that was produced, that Siv has been talking about, but that's very nice sitting over there on a website. If you don't use it and can't use it, then it's just a waste of ink. So creating the hubs in Milton Keynes was really important, because what it did, it created an opportunity to bring leaders and emerging leaders together to be able to use all that resource. And I think the fact that it was a regular program and people came together, they became accountable to each other. There was discussion and debate, because sometimes some of the academic language is a little bit impenetrable, but when you are talking about it and chatting about it, it becomes alive. And what happened was that we engaged with groups that we hadn't spoken to for a very long time. We were getting better applications, so we could spend our money, so that we could go back to our philanthropists and ask them to donate more, because they would have greater impact. So, I mean, that's where the rubber hits the road.
Thank you, Ian. We'll come back. Now we move to Anand and Henry Smith Charity. So obviously, we have known each other for just over a year, potentially. So tell us what when you are thinking about the potential partners, and obviously many were knocking on your door, why did the Henry Smith Charity decide to invest in the Minority Ethnic Leadership Program?
Sure. So as I said in my introduction, one of the new things that Henry Smith will be doing is investing in leadership development. And the work that we're doing in partnership with you is one of a number of grants that we have made and will be making over the next few months. So as well as Henry Smith working with Open University, the other substantial thing that we're doing is with the CLAW Social Leadership Programme to work to fund 3 place-based leadership programs in deprived rural and coastal areas. And we're also supporting a programme of pooled funding for leaders and managers from the refugee and migration sector in partnership with Migration Exchange. I'm going to be at an event there later today. So when we were setting this up, what we did was set out what we were looking to achieve in terms of our strategy, and the reason for coming into this, you both touched on it, and I suspect people here will understand the case quite vividly. For social impact, social change to happen, it's important that the people who are leading that work have a setup for success. Have the skills, have the learning, have the development, but the amount of funding going into this area is woefully inadequate. Often the people working in the organisations who require this funding can't afford it, so it falls to the funders of civil society to step in. I mean, that's essentially the case, which I think is a fairly straightforward one. You're right, there are lots of people knocking on the door. One of the things that we look at is alignment of strategy and alignment of purpose. And for us, as well as funding leaders and managers in civil society, there's a very big emphasis on diversity. I've benefited a couple of times from investment in my development in leadership programs, but those opportunities are very hard to come by, and so in our new strategy, DEI, diversity, is at the heart of it. So a combination of diversity and a focus on leadership and management meant that when we were introduced, it was something that I was keen to pursue because I could see a potential match on paper. And working with you, working with Tracy, we spent about 5 or 6 months getting to know each other, working through various iterations and developing that partnership and alignment and shared vision. It's very much a pilot. As Tia said, it's still very early stages when we launched the programme in February. But that was the reason why A, thought it worth a conversation, and B, why we are now at the stage that we're at today.
Thank you. Going back to Ian. Couple of years ago, the voluntary sector is undergoing some very difficult times because of the financial crisis, cutting funding and so forth. You reached out to the Open University, to CVSL, to do some work with you in terms of, trying to understand what the needs of the voluntary sector, as it were. And obviously, we did the work with you, with yourselves. What difference did this work make, and why working with the university was such a different experience compared to working, I don't know, with anybody else you could have hired for the job?
Well, it was interesting because we went through a competitive process to look at researchers, but one of the things that clinched it for working with the OU was the absolute independence, because as any voluntary sector organisation will know, when you're talking to your funding body, you're kind of thinking what they want to hear, because you want to keep friendly with them, you want to be ready for the next application. And so for the Community Foundation, that would mean that we would get a very skewed view. We wouldn't get an honest view. And I remember the meeting when you first came and said, well, we've got the findings. Do you really want to know all warts and all? I said, absolutely, because how on earth could we change if we didn't know that? And it's meant that we've been able to completely recast our grants programme. We had a grants programme that had titles like small grants, But we found out that most of the organisations in Milton Keynes, they had like turnovers, voluntary organisations, of less than 50,000. So a small grant, £5,000, was actually really big to them. So calling it small was, you know, really patronising. And it also meant that the way we looked at it and the way we worked with it in partnership with other bits of funding was skewed. So it's going to scrap all of that. We also are going to now work creating more partnership. In fact, 50% of our funding is going to be through partnership grants, where we try to match the findings of our vital signs report, which is kind of a bit of a sort of like a social atlas of what's going on in the city, with organisations. And rather than sitting there waiting passively for organisations to rock up with a proposal, we're going to be putting out prospectus. You know, this is what we want to change. This is what the research. Come and make suggestions, and we will try to bring. And then the funding will be, yes, it still will be a grant, but it will be a partnership grant. So the foundation will work closer with those organisations that are providing the change. So it was fundamental, and we're just starting the rollout.
Thank you, thank you. And if we go to Anand, and obviously Henry Smith Charity, I know you have mentioned the organization through which you are supporting the voluntary sector. So the leadership in the voluntary sector, and so we are one of the 3 partners we have at the moment working on it. So why do you feel it is very important to develop the leadership of the sector? Why are you putting in the money?
Yeah, so I suppose I touched on this in my answer a few minutes ago, but I think, you know, a combination of personal, professional experience and data shows that the leadership and management and governance of organisations is crucial for organisation effectiveness. And again, coming back to that almost quite fundamental point, which I suspect people in a university will get intuitively, is that investing in people's education, skills, development and networks is helping to set them up for success. But there is a mismatch between, you know, those facts of life and the opportunities and the amount of funding going in to support this activity in the civil society sector. I've worked in civil society. Well, actually, I've been a volunteer in civil society since I was 18 years old, but I've worked as a professional since early 30s, so 20 years now. And it's not easy to get those opportunities, A, that they exist, and B, even if they do exist and you can find the fund, you've then got to find the funding for them. So I suppose my analysis is that the market isn't functioning properly, and that together with, and there's a group of funders who are working together to look at UK civil society leadership development, where we are today and what that could look like in the future. So there's a number of us who are doing that, but it's dysfunctional at the moment. But I don't think it would take too much actually to get a properly capitalised, well-functioning sector.
Yeah, thank you.
That's why I'm doing it.
Yeah. So I know we are keeping an eye on the questions online, because so I'm just preempt that in about 20 minutes or so, 15 minutes or so, we will be stopping to give people the opportunity to ask us questions, because I picked mine, so maybe there might be some other questions you want to ask. So please send your questions, and I know I can see my colleague Daniel is keeping an eye, and he will be reading those questions. So now I have another question, which obviously I did not tell you I was going to ask, but I'm going to do it anyway, which is, as academic institutions, we have got, I remember very well, actually, Carol, you won't mind me saying it. One day you did a presentation. I was new at the time, and you had some sort of 3 pillars. I still remember them vividly. Okay, so research, teaching, and whatever knowledge exchange or engagement, which is fine, and that's what we do in CVSL. So the question I have for you both, and is, are universities doing enough to work with you and to work with the voluntary sector? So so in your view, could we do more? And if we could do more, what is this more? Ian.
No, you're not doing enough. Not yet. I mean, the campus here in Milton Keynes is a fine example of a missed opportunity. It's a beautiful place, but sometimes it feels empty. And that's a great shame because it's this amazing resource in this wonderful city. I always come to the inaugural lectures when I can. Sometimes I've got no idea what's being said. It pushed right over my head. But other times I get something that I just didn't expect. And this wonderful resource is sitting here in this city, and yet it doesn't really connect with the place that it sits in. And I bet you that's the case for every other Open University campus in the city, in the UK. So we could, always do more, because when you have those conversations, we all gain something and we always learn something and we make new connections. Fidele is connected with the Community Foundation. You'd expect that. He lives in the city. And I find that when I go and have lunch with Fidele or any other leader from the OU, the conversation goes in a direction you don't expect, and you come away with something that was fresh and new. And I would like to keep my little notebook, and I'll write down an idea, or I must go and look at that, or I must go and check that out, or that person's interested. And so, I think universities as a place for discovery, for a place for wonderment and for curiosity, that's what this place or any university can be, and it needs to open itself up. And I know, sorry, academics, you quite like cloistered environments, but sometimes cloisters, from my understanding, if you go into a cloister and you call out, you shout out, it echoes around much, much more. It bounces off the stones, and what you get is a richer sound.
Thank you, Anand.
Are universities doing enough to work in collaboration? I mean, the answer is, I'd agree, probably not, but you're not alone in that. I think that the same could be said about organizations in other sectors. So let's take my foundation as an example. As I said, we're about to launch a new strategy in a few weeks' time. And if you read the strategy, it's very well written, very short, but you'll see a big emphasis on collaboration and networking. And it almost sounds as if it's quite banal, but actually it's quite a fundamental change in how we think about ourselves and our role. So rather than being an institution that assesses applications and writes checks and collects monitoring forms and then writes more checks, we are naturally very well networked. One of the sectors that we are one of the weightier funders in is domestic violence. And so we will have connections through current and previous funding with the organisations working in that really throughout the country. But we haven't really conceptualised that as a network. We haven't really thought about how we can bring that network together for shared learning and for collaboration. So that kind of convening power that we naturally hold, but also that connection between those organisations, those people and decision makers, and working across sectors and across silos. Some of us were having a discussion at breakfast beforehand, and I don't know if you get to a certain stage in your career, maybe I have now, or I'm not particularly, should I say this, I'm not particularly bothered about the organisation or the sector that I'm in. I'm interested in the outcome and working with whoever will enable that shared outcome to work. So, we're partners on this work. I'm partners with other people on other work as well. And so, yes, let's ensure that we're working closely with universities, with journalists, whoever it is, but let's start off with the outcome and think about all the actors who can help to enable that outcome and cut through these wretched silos that keep us apart.
Thank you. And I hope, getting a few more questions online, because, I'm thinking of, being interactive. So I was delighted we had Tia earlier joining us online. So we need to have it as properly hybrid. My final question is obviously you know, looking back at the sector at the moment. I know you as funders, when I was in the voluntary sector, all the time it was about collaboration. We could do more with less organizations. We have got too many, I don't know, when I was in Dublin, we used to talk about too many ethnic minority networks. So how do you think, you know, the sector can harness this whole idea of collaboration without necessarily losing their own identities? So, and I know Ian, I sat on the grand panel at some stage, and I know a few times we would have said, okay, you know, somebody is doing a similar job. Maybe we should be connecting them to make sure. So how do we go about, you know, looking at the promise of collaboration on one hand, but also allowing organizations to be themselves? Because there is a reason why they are set up. Yeah.
So I reflect back on some of the stuff that happened around the pandemic. There was a big priority around food distribution, especially pockets of poverty or disconnected communities that couldn't access the mainstream. And we have a wonderful food bank in Milton Keynes that really responded, but not necessarily had the connections to all those hidden communities. All sorts of reasons, some institutional in the way that they ran, but also just people that would have accessed food banks before the pandemic. And then when we launched our fund, we had a lot of applications for food projects, and a lot of them were quite specialist, so either from religious groups or particularly community groups, diverse community groups, but they couldn't get the food. They didn't have the big networks, and of course a lot of the government funding came through the local authority who worked with the OU. And so what we could do in our applications is we could fund the organisation to do the community connection bit and connect with the food bank to do the getting the food bit, because you remember people couldn't go into shops and all sorts of things. And that was a really good example of especially from diverse communities, they had the relationships that the food bank didn't have or the local authority didn't have. So you could, by working together, the thing was done. You know, the food got to there. I mean, it's not all perfect, and some of these groups have really kind of had that boost of being connected, and then their profiles raised. So they're now doing slightly different things, but they're more visible, and that's been really powerful. So it's a really good example of how when you connect things up, you don't take away the essence of the individual organisation, you enable it to do its work if you can get people to work together. It's a bit difficult when there's a little bit of funding on the table because everybody fights for it, but you know, actually it's not about the money, it's about, I think you say, the outcomes. You know, if that's what makes a difference, does it really get to where it's supposed to get, and does it make the change that it's supposed to make?
Yes.
I mean, I agree with all of that. I think underpinning your question was, you know, are there too many charities? Essentially, kind of what you were getting at. Now, look, Henry Smith doesn't have a view on that, and I've looked at the data recently, but there's something like 180,000 registered charities. In previous roles and previous lives, I've been involved in initiating and leading mergers to bring for different strategic reasons. All I would say is we've got to get the balance right between some kind of dull uniformity and, you know, what could be characterized as kind of slightly chaotic and messy landscape. What that looks like, I don't know. I just know that you know, if you are trying to access a service as a, you know, there's different language for it, service user or beneficiary, and that service is split up amongst a number of different services in your local community, it's quite difficult actually to join that up. You know, one of the previous roles that I did before coming to Henry Smith, I was in an interim role, chief executive at my local Age UK in Merton in South London. And one of the things we did there was join up with a couple of other organisations to provide a single entry point for refugees who had just arrived from Ukraine. And that was a excellent piece of work, actually, one that I kind of wasn't involved in initiating, but kind of came in towards the end on. And it was the local authority who spotted the need and the gap, gave a bit of money to encourage that collaboration to provide that support. You know, just even simple things like you get a phone call and being able to transfer it through to the right organisation, that seemed to take the most time because we all had different phone systems. So thinking about this question from the point of view of the people that are using these services and what makes sense for them, I think should be the starting point.
Thank you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and give more time to people to ask questions. But before we do that, I'm, you know, while Steve goes to the lectern, so any final comments before we go to the Q&A? Is there anything which you are expecting to be asked, which I did ask, for example?
Well, when I listen to what others are saying, I realise the bits that I've missed out. So I'll use this opportunity to fill in a few gaps. So whilst I had a little bit of a go at the OU, I didn't mean it, because actually I found working with the OU, especially on the Open Societal Challenges programme, really interesting, because what that is about is trying to grasp those nettily problems and sort of test and learn and develop new outcomes. And particularly I've been involved in one around ethnic business leaders, of how to scale up companies and all the barriers that are often set there. And the idea of putting academics alongside entrepreneurs, you know, and give them the really best opportunities, that's powerful stuff. So at its best, that's very powerful. And so we should do more of those sort of programs, and we should do many of those sort of programs in the voluntary sector, because I think if we learn together, you'll get different insights to your own sort of your problems. And thinking about the poem and Tia's sort of challenge about not seeing herself in the leadership, and then how that affect her view. I mean, that's so powerful. Absolutely. Because it's the voluntary sector that often is such a nuisance to the statutory sector and society as a whole. We keep banging on about our passion, which is why I think that we should have more voluntary sector organisations, not less, because they tend to come from a place of passion, and that's what makes change happen. The first crane to go up in Milton Keynes after about 10 years was a voluntary sector project, first high crane, you know, and that's because we just kept on. And I remember the leader of the council saying once the building was open, oh yes, you know, you came into the room and you sort of bounced around, said you can do this, you can do that, this is the thing. And we thought, yeah, we'll let you go on with it. Not really thinking that we could do it, but we did. You can do amazing things if you stick with it and you demonstrate that passion, and don't let everybody else tell you can't do it.
I'm happy to go straight into questions.
Okay, thank you. We have a roving mic, and over to you, Steve.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Anand, and thank you, Fidele, for such an insightful and thought-provoking conversation. I'll just give a couple of comments whilst I give you a chance to think about what questions you want to ask if you haven't already done it, right? So, Ian, thank you for fessing up to forgetting to say the things you wanted to say, because I always feel like that as well, especially on the time pressure. And I love your quote, some balance between dull uniformity and chaotic and messy. And I'm going to borrow that using it in relation to leadership, because I do think that often when we talk about leadership, and we talk about leadership of very complex social challenges, we can't be stuck with one way of doing things. We need to have the confidence to let it go, and even if that feels a bit chaotic and messy at some points. So was that enough time? We'll start with a couple of questions from the room, and then Daniel is keeping an eye on questions online. So who would like to have the first question? Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for some really interesting insights. I think the work that this project is doing is incredible, and there's some really clear kind of principles which I think we're all trying to work towards. So I have a challenge to you as funders. How do you as funders demonstrate collaboration from that peer-to-peer level? Because funders are powerful and influential and often don't talk to one another. So how are you collaborating and find space to, I guess, continue your own leadership in the sector from that perspective?
Shall I start? Sorry, I didn't catch your name there.
My name's Faiza Vaid, and I'm from a charity called Pregnant Then Screwed. Full disclosure, I'm also a trustee at the Smallwood Trust. So I have a personal interest in asking this question because it's one I ask myself all the time.
Thanks, Faiza. You've actually got me on one of my favourite subjects here, so I shall try and restrain myself. Pregnant and Screwed is one of my favourite organisations. Actually, back in the day, I used to head up an organisation called Daycare Trust, which campaigned for high quality, affordable childcare and services for families. That's now kind of gone through a couple of mergers and is now part of Quorum Family and Childcare. But we need somebody, kind of making a noise, I think, in the sector. And I think Pregnant and Screwed is doing that remarkably well. I think you're absolutely right. So I think, you put it quite gently, but there's a lot of hypocrisy, right, amongst funders, let's be clear. And I still see myself as somebody that's worked for 20 years in civil society and a bit of an interloper in the funding world and trying to set up the funding world to work in a way that I think it should work. And that point about collaboration is quite right. There's funders, I've kind of been part of this when applying for funding. They encourage collaboration in their funding, and you're looking at collaboration at a funder level, and you're kind of looking around. Now, it is happening, but it could be a lot more. It could just be a lot more effective, right? And again, when the new strategy comes out in a month's time, you will see kind of references A to collaboration, but B to learning. And for me, this is absolutely huge. First job in a foundation, and I feel incredibly privileged to be getting all of this information from hundreds of organizations who either who apply for funding, about what's happening in their areas, what are the needs that they identify, what are the challenges that they have found, what are the lessons that they have learned, and we sit on it, right? We should be opening that up. So one of the things that I've also been engaged with, initially with New Philanthropy Capital, but it's their Open Philanthropy project. And essentially, after 3 years in the foundation world, I don't really think we've got much IP. I've worked in different contexts where you do have IP, databases and customers and product design and so on, but not in this world. And so I think the default should be to open it up. We've got to make sure that it's opened up in terms of insights and ways that are actionable. But that for me is a very big ambition, and again, quite a profound change of thinking, of conceptualizing the difference that you can make, but as being that hub for kind of shared learning and opening ourselves up. I'm really, really kind of passionate about that. We're right at the beginning. Of that work. The other way in which I think we could work better as funders, and we're starting to do this, is, when I came into Henry Smith, I'd be like, okay, there's lots of other funders who are, say, working in domestic violence. Where's the forums that I can go to speak to the other funders about where we're funding and what we're learning? And it's kind of not really very coherent, actually. And maybe there's lots of discussions going on. I haven't been invited, who knows? But I haven't found them yet in 3 years. Some sectors are better than others. I'm going to a migration exchange one this afternoon, which is the funders coming together about asylum and migration. So again, this is something which is really big and really important for me. And I completely agree with, again, you put it very politely, but the thrust of your challenge, which is, come on, funders, you talk a good game on collaboration, get your act together. Absolutely.
Thank you, Anand. Ian, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I think on a local level, we've got to do the same. We produce this report, Vital Signs. It has, I think, 12 themes, and our managers that work with the philanthropists and donors, we kind of have them coalescing around one of the themes, and so those managers will talk to the donors that are interested in a particular area. Maybe it's education, maybe it's young people, maybe it's because we fund all sort of civil activity, civil society activity in the city. But they also do the grant funding application. So they support those organisations that are applying to write good fund applications, and it's a little bit competitive because all our fund managers want to win the money in the grant panel for their organisation they're supporting. But the really important thing is that those philanthropy managers go out and are part of the networks. So the person that looks after the Arts and Cultural Fund goes to the Arts and Cultural networks, and everybody jumps on them. That's okay, and we try to engage. I don't know whether, a bit like doing the research, whether they're telling us the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but you've got to start somewhere, and you've got to create those relationships. It's a working process.
But following on from our conversation before this meeting, I think one of the fantastic things that your community foundation does is do that join up within the foundation, right? So you manage whatever it was, 270 odd funds. People apply, and then you work out the relationship between the funds. But there's a join up role there that you're doing internally. That if I was applying to you for funding, I would find very valuable.
Yeah, and that doesn't always happen. I mean, the foundation network, there's 47 of us, we're all different, which is a bit of a shame because I think there's an opportunity where we could improve together. But for us, you apply to MK Community Foundation, and then we sort out where the funding comes from, and then we do the reporting back to the funder, the donor or the corporate or whatever. And that works because one project can be funded by 5 different organisations. But you don't know that, and you don't need to know that because all you're about is trying to get your funding and get going.
But that stops me applying to 5 different funders. I apply once, and then you kind of get that's what's really good about that.
Well, but also we see the relationship back to the funder, because for all our funds, they have fund criteria. We want to do something in an area of the city for young people, for example, and then when you haven't spent their fund, and they say, why haven't you spent my fund? And we'll say, well, perhaps your criteria needs to be changed slightly, maybe. And you have that conversation, you have that relationship, and then they'll tweak it, and suddenly the money gets spent. And it's because it's a disconnect. They have I want to do this, I want to make this change happen, but perhaps it's not what the community wants or needs. And so the foundation can then act as that sort of interloper of trying to sort of match the good intention to real change.
Wonderful. You can see that was a perfect question, right? And maybe there's an opportunity to talk a bit more about this over a break, lunch, or whatever. Given the time, I wonder if we should go online, Daniel, as you know, so we can carry on. If you can pick one, and Jackie will tell us how we're doing for time.
Yeah, thanks. I think probably best served by combining a few. So prepare yourselves. There's going to be some info coming at you. So, but big thanks to everyone who's asked a question online. Some really good ones. So some of these subjects have been picked up a little in your responses as well. Fundamentally, I think people are asking about tips. Top tips that you would give for working And for organisations looking to fund collaborative projects, so top tips, that's a question from Kirsten Hogg from SCVO. Within that, so top tips, within that, can you think about commissioning, specifically voluntary sector infrastructure, if you got any thoughts on that, which is a question from JC. And Sonia Bassi, one of our PhD students at the OU and chair of Liverpool CVS, asked how funders can ensure funding is reaching Black-led organisations in all areas of the UK. So some top tips generally about collaborative projects, funding collaborative projects, importance of voluntary sector infrastructure, and then importance of ensuring funding is reaching Black-led organisations. And I think, yeah, that's probably enough to go on. Thanks, guys.
Top tip for us would be, I suppose, I think it's kind of like working naturally with the right partner. So when somebody is trying to just chase a pot of money, and they're doing it because they want to get the money, and it's not really their business to be working in that area. They don't have a track record. I mean, we see that. You know, it's obvious. And for us, having that discussion with our philanthropy team, our grant making team, while you're writing the application or responding to the question, we're not asking you questions because we're trying to catch you out. We're asking you questions because we want to make a good argument to the funding panel, which in our case is your peers. So we have 15 members of a panel that are all from the sector that make the judgments and do the scoring. Yeah, I think that's probably would be my top tip.
Shall I respond on the question about Black-led organisations? So I think one of the key things to do is to make sure you collect the data. Actually, I think funders need to be very careful about the questions and the forms that they ask organisations to fill out, but I think this is a very important piece of information. So, you know, we in our monitoring, in our application forms, and then in our reporting as well, we're part of something called the DEI data standard. We will publish through that, and also through 360 Giving, how our funding is going out amongst different categories, including to Black-led organisations. So you need the data in the first place, and then the kind of slightly obvious point is to make sure that if there are gaps in your funding, or if there are gaps in funding in general, that your criteria, your fundraising criteria and your prioritisation criteria respond to those gaps.
And I think that's where our partnership funding programme is going to fill a gap, because we do exactly that. And if it does not reflect in our community and we're not getting those applications, it's not the organisation's issue, it's our issue.
No, we need to go out.
We need to go out there and create those relationships. Yeah,
that's right.
All right. Do we have time for one more question?
Just one.
Just one more. This will have to be the final one, sadly, but please keep engaging with us.
Okay, my name is Chibuzo Chimokoro. I come from a community group called Igbo Union Milton Keynes. Just a follow-up question from the one the lady over there asked, and your answer, Ian. So as if in terms of collaboration, if a group applies for funds to you and it's not exactly what you fund, as part of way of collaboration, do you have a way of saying, we would rather refer you to this, or do you is there a possibility of passing them on to another group you think is a better place to fund that program or project?
I think the relationships that we have with our the people that fund us, mean that, and the fact that the way our community foundation generates its own income from some of the property holdings it's got, means that we've got a general fund as well. So we've got all the ones that have got all the criteria, but we've also got some general stuff. And we always try to persuade donors to be as general as you possibly can, so that you can respond to the needs. So I wouldn't worry about that. Don't worry about the fund, worry about the project and the difference you're making, and you tell that story well. And we'll want to be part of that. When often we write in social media, we are privileged to, we really mean it, because it means that we're doing something we don't do anything. You do it. And we can't make any change happen without organisations like you telling us and creating great projects. Yeah. I don't know if that answered the question completely, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your questions. And I'm sorry if this feels frustrating, but we are actually on time. So it's an opportunity now to thank our conservationists, and to have a coffee. 5 minutes break.
Yes. So now
Coffee and tea downstairs. Oh, is it 20 minutes? Oh.
Yes. So I think it's time to start again. And it's a great pleasure to welcome. Earlier we had one of my predecessors. So we have two predecessors, no more or less immediate, who will be talking to us and reflecting on some of the experience with obviously CVSL, what we have done ever since, and I can't wait to hear what we have to say to us. Again, I remind people who are online, you get your chance to put your questions in the chat. We are monitoring it, and you'll get a chance to ask questions directly to the speakers. Without further ado, James and Carol, former directors of CVSL, over to you.
Thank you so much, Fidele and the team here at the OU. It's always amazing when you get invited back because you think, well, it must have been okay then. But no, genuinely, both James and I not only work together, but continue to collaborate really closely with colleagues at CVSL. We're both visiting fellows. And we're just going to take this opportunity to take you back and through our journey in terms of a lot of our thinking about leadership, and particularly about collective and collaborative forms and approaches to leadership, and share a little bit about where we are now, and then invite your questions, but also invite you to our workshop this afternoon, those of you on site, to come and discuss some of these issues with us. We genuinely see ourselves as learners, and we want to learn from you as much as you might hopefully pick up something from us. So rather presumptively, we've entitled this Everything We've Learned About Collective and Collaborative Leadership and Why We Think It Matters. So yeah, we hope there'll be something useful here. So we're going to share our learning. We're going to introduce those ideas of collaborative and collective approaches to leadership. Interestingly, we literally just been talking today about how these ideas, when we first met at CVSL sort of some 10 years ago, these ideas were a little bit new in the sector and how they're beginning to permeate. And I think even listening to some of the conversations today, you can see how these different approaches are beginning to permeate into practice more and more. And we want to say a little bit about why we think these approaches are particularly pertinent and useful to the voluntary sector, and to invite your responses. So in the time-honoured academic way, first of all, we're sharing some definitions, and we're going to say later something about how much we owe to Steve's work. But that first definition, leadership, making things happen, we take from Vangen and Huxham's work, and also talk about making things matter. And then collective leadership, and again, these are definitions that people discuss over and over and over again, but collective leadership for the purpose of this presentation, making things happen or making things matter together with others, and understanding that actually leadership happens through interactions, not just through the actions of the single individual, but always through interactions. Now, you can talk about leaders and followers, but actually more and more it's about people who influence one another, people who come from the front line, people with lived experience, communities, minority groups who are coming together to make a difference and make things happen. So collectivity, and then collaborative leadership, where we're thinking particularly about how those interactions happen across boundaries to address shared aims in shared spaces. And we'll say a little bit more about that later, but those boundaries could be sector boundaries, they could be organisational boundaries. Again, we've heard a little bit about that already, but they're also thematic boundaries and boundaries of space and place, but always continually working across those boundaries. So quick definitions, lots we could discuss with you on those, but for the moment, working definitions. I'm going to say something about my background and then hand over to James. We're going to do this as a two-hander. I did think slightly it was a little bit like a two-hander podcast, but don't expect the funny music or any of those, you know, other little bits that go with the podcast. We haven't quite got those. Adverts. But the adverts, yeah, we won't give you the Spotify adverts. And please excuse me if I cough. I've had a dose of flu for a good 10 days, but I'll try not to cough at you. So my background, I came to the OU as a full-timer. Sorry, Steve, but it's 16 years ago. We were very, very young, weren't we, at the time, both of us. But I came to work with Steve and do my PhD with Steve. We're still both very young, of course. But I came from a background where I'd worked in voluntary sector and I'd worked in the public sector in policy development, project development and strategy jobs. And a lot of my life, therefore, often around child poverty issues, childcare. Interestingly, I remembered Anand from when he was at the Daycare Trust. A lot of that time I used to spend working in interagency boards, either supporting representatives or being a representative or trying to influence and persuade. And for me, one of the things that was really tricky was often I felt, despite my kind of titles of strategy manager or, you know, lead on this, that and the other, I felt quite disempowered in many of those situations. I felt immensely frustrated by the fact that collaboration really just didn't seem to quite work like I thought it should do as it was advertised. And yet I would have said of myself that I was incredibly predisposed towards collaborative ways of working. So I did a little bit of management studies initially with the OU, and then came into my PhD, and my PhD is on collaboration for children. It won't surprise you too much to know, and taking a voluntary sector perspective on that, because I really wanted to understand, why does this collaborative way of working and leading not seem to work quite as I thought it should in practice? So that was how I came to CVSL. James.
Over to me. Thank you. Thanks, Carol. So I'm James. Since 2019, when I handed over the directorship of CVSL to Carol, I've been working at the University of Wolverhampton. But it's a pleasure to be back today. And I say that, that sounds like what we all have to say, but I genuinely mean it. It's wonderful to be back. So thank you particularly to Fidele for inviting me and Carol to come back and say a few words. As I say, lovely to be back amongst friends. So starting points. Steve talked about this in her presentation, how I came to be at CVSL. I came directly from the what are they called now? Third Sector Research Centre at the University of Birmingham, where I've been working particularly on research in the third sector with a group of academics in a ESRC-funded large research centre. We did, I would say this, but we did a fantastic breadth of research around the third sector. And I guess I fulfilled that particular niche that Steve was looking for, of bringing in the kind of real voluntary sector so-called expertise. I came here pretty much a neophyte around leadership. So for me, I didn't come with any baggage or particular background around, sort of connected to leadership studies. And so it was a huge learning curve for me to kind of get up to speed a bit more with debates around leadership. And again, that's been an incredibly fascinating process. And working with Carol, we've all learned a huge amount together, sort of, sharing learning, working with a whole range of colleagues, as we're going to talk more about. But I would say I came into studying leadership, I guess, as a bit of a skeptic, it's fair to say. I didn't come in with any particular adherence to a particular viewpoint. I was very much a kind of skeptic to leadership. And I think that's always influenced me in thinking, what do other people who might also be skeptics towards leadership, what might they be thinking about leadership? How would they approach it? Why might they be in some ways resistant to a message around leadership? So I've always come with that kind of background. So as Steve explained, I came into CVSL almost at the beginning, not quite at the beginning, because Steve had done a lot of the sort of groundwork for my role. But I did come in, and Steve explained this right at the beginning. I remember sitting down in the Young Building cafe. She said, "It's over to you. You bring the kind of voluntary sector stuff, and we need to work around leadership. Lots going on, loads of colleagues to talk to, and that's where the collaborative journey really began." But there were a few kind of ground rules, if you like, or certain things we were working on right from the beginning. And one of those, as Steve explained, was this focus on smaller voluntary sector organisations, and that was always there right at the beginning. There's a whole debate around why we focused on that, and it was particularly important. The basic perception was that the leadership work that we were doing was particularly needed and particularly would be valued within smaller organisations because of lack of capacity and a whole range of debates around that. That was our starting point, and I think what we've learned as we've learned more about leadership in this particular space is that actually a lot of the learning and the lessons around leadership apply across different sorts of organisations, different contexts, different sizes of organisations. If, for example, a large voluntary sector organisation came to us and wanted to work with us, we wouldn't turn them away in some ways, because it would be another opportunity to collaborate and learn and share learning, and they could then perhaps filter something down to, might be the smaller or the more local parts of the sector. So again, as I've said, we've all said, collaboration was really written into the work right from the beginning. Another really important part of the work that was always kind of fixed as I came into the role was about our focus on online learning. Obviously, that really ties into the Open University mission that Steve was talking about earlier. We've tended to refer to that as free informal learning. It's often been free, and there's a whole debate around the pros and cons of that approach. Free informal learning, and again, that was a huge thing that was embedded into the program right at the beginning. And I guess an early tension for us was always how much is online, how much is distance, how much is very much an open university kind of methodology and approach, and how much is actually about the local. So Fidele was talking earlier with colleagues about that incredibly important and relational work that happens at a local level. We tried in many ways to work on that. And Fidele, again, was really central to driving some of the local approach to embedding learning that we did manage to achieve, and we continue to work, all of us, on. So yeah, small group of academics, it says there. We were all very much involved in real world voluntary activity, and again, Fidele, shows that in spades. We were all practicing spirit of collaborative leadership, as I've talked about, and we also worked really hard to kind of build the evidence base. And a really important thing that we did, and I'll say a bit more about this in a moment, is actually building the evidence base around literature reviewing, publishing, all the academic stuff that we have to do. And our colleague Vita, who we continue to work with, now based at IVAR in London, led on a really good literature review, which we published open access, and also published academically as well. So Carol, over to you. Oh no, it's not, it's me. I will continue. Definitions again, I'm sorry about this, particularly sorry about this really busy slide, and I've been presenting this at a few different lectures recently. There's always an audible intake of breath of, oh my God, you've hit us with a load of pedantic debate around definitions. And the voluntary sector is particularly bedeviled by debates around, or not even debates, but just discussion about different use of language and complexity that reflects lots of different things going on within the sector. And indeed, one of the questions we address is, what is even the sector anyway? What do we mean by the sector? So I was intrigued by Ian's comment about academics saying things that go over people's heads. Well, actually, I'm sorry, but the sector itself is incredibly complicated, and there's all sorts of jargon. There's jargon whichever field you might go into. So just really quickly, I'm not going to go into too much depth or dwell on this, but on the one hand, you've got what I would call sort of portmanteau definitions, VCS, VC, FSE. These tend to be sort of almost imposed on the sector, often by funders or infrastructure bodies or public agencies. Then in the middle, you've got a sort of set of terms that tend to be used by academics. So we talk a lot about the voluntary sector or the third sector. And again, there's debates about whether there are any even differences. And then you've got a group of academics, some of whom are in the room today, who are actually more interested in things like social enterprise, social innovation, the social economy. And again, that's written into a lot of the work that's happened at the business school. They tend to sit over there, not talk to each other. We sit over there. Fantastic that we've got people in the room today, and that just shows the fantastic work that CVSL has done over the years, as well as the OU. Then there are lots of terms that we don't particularly like, particularly in the UK context. So charity has overtones of paternalism. That just needs to be stated. When people talk about non-profits in the UK context, or NGOs, we tend to think, maybe they are not quite referring to the same thing, because these tend to be US-based terms. So again, lots of somewhat pedantic debate about terminology. And then we get onto a discussion about civil society, which we are, I think, Carol, it's fair to say, we increasingly use this term. But it's not just us, it's been around for many, many years, and we've heard it today as well, because this is a slightly different vision of what the kind of space that we're talking about. Civil society is not really so much about organizations or the specific forms like charities. It's about this whole, as I might say, tentacular vision of how civil society works across different sectors. It's in the public sector, it's in volunteering, which by the way spreads across different sectors. You could even think about how unions are part of civil society, which obviously operate within different sectors. And again, the point being that this is about going back to that quote earlier on. This is people doing things for themselves, working with others across and in between all of these different spaces. And again, that's something we've tried to kind of grapple with and think about how our work, which typically at starting point started in the voluntary sector, is actually really relevant across all of these different spaces. And without further ado, I will pass back to Carol to talk about signposts and stopping off points.
So although we talk about the voluntary sector in the remainder of this presentation, that debate about what is the sector and how is it working with other types of organisations, and actually can you define the sector that easily, is really pertinent to us going on and thinking a little bit about leadership. We want to first of all just to say we've not given you some great reading lists. If you want a reading list, by all means email us. Please do email us. We love to be in email correspondence with people, and we'll send you that reading list. But we did want to just acknowledge some of what we call the signposts along the way, which are both our academic reading, our thinking, our ideas, and also some of our colleagues who've been really important. And if you're interested in that, you can go away and follow some of these people. in my early work, Chryslip, who was writing in the 1990s, and then Bryson and Crosby, who are from America, who had a really positive view about the potential of working across boundaries and leading across boundaries, and leading with communities fully engaged, not just doing to, but doing with. These ideas were really, really important. But one of the many things I found really helpful from Steve's work, I mean, first, as I say, we have adopted this phrase, making things happen, from that work as a phrase that we use for leadership. But also, what I found really helpful as a practitioner was reading and realizing that collaboration is necessarily full of inherent tensions. Now, there are whole other presentations on that, and you might have heard Steve talk about it. But actually, it's a bit of a revelation, I find, because what it releases you from as a practitioner is the idea that collaboration is somehow all going to be just perfect and beautiful, and because we're all in a good place, it'll all work seamlessly. I can see a few people smiling already. It isn't quite like that, because we all bring so much stuff in terms of our different goals and our interests, and all kinds of things. So even though we're trying to do something together, all this stuff is going on. Our former colleague, now at Durham University, Owain Smolovich-Jones, was really important to us in these early days as our thinking was developing, because Owain, he led the two courses that we've referred to, which were developed back in 2016. I was very much his second author on that. And Owain was really the first person who began to sort of persuade me towards this focus on everyday leadership interactions, not just looking at the individual who's got a great job and going, oh, what skills do they need? What's their personality like? But actually, what are the everyday interactions that go on that actually lead to getting stuff done, making things happen, bringing things to attention? And I remember very early on writing that course, and one of the first things, and it's still in that course material online, free online on the Open University platform, is he talked about the practice of noticing. And I just thought initially, I hope he's not listening to this recording, I thought, this is a bit bizarre. What does he mean? Leadership is about noticing. But the more I've thought about it over the next nearly 10 years, the more I thought, my goodness, this is absolutely crucial as a leadership practice that isn't about standing on a stage, isn't about big things, but actually noticing, observing what is going on around you. Absolutely crucial as a leadership practice. So Owain really influenced us, I think, both in that way. And he pointed us towards the work of Carol and Raylin, and he and Steve pointed us towards Sonia Espina's work, all of this coming out of North America, but increasingly this focus on look at the everyday, look at the interactions, look at the practice between people, but also between people and things, and people and spaces. And I found that really, really helpful, because some of those it brings you back to context. It brings you back to the things and spaces that are specific to voluntary sector or civil society identity, or to your theme, your issue that you are working on, rather than leadership is this, it's a set kind of framework. The leadership is these everyday interactions in which continually you are engaging, you're noticing, you're influencing, you're communicating constantly around these issues. Also really interesting is that Sonia Espina and her co-authors also work quite a lot on issues like Indigenous leadership. And so you're very much getting this kind of discussion around everyday interactions where people are not in a position of power, they haven't got huge resources, and yet they're making things happen and they're making things matter. So that's been really important to us. Also important to us, and we're going to mention in a minute, our work on place leadership is, again, a former colleague, Alessandro Sancino, who was amongst others introduced us to the idea of place leadership, and the work of Robin Hambleton, amongst others, which made us, as people who count ourselves as voluntary sector scholars, go, hang on a minute, where's the voluntary sector in the literature around place leadership? And trying to, and it kind of is there, but we would argue in not in a very detailed way, till our book comes out later this year, plug, But genuinely, this is really the beginning, we feel, of a conversation that should put civil society right back into the debate about place leadership. And indeed, I think if you listen to somebody like Ian Revell, he's doing that in practice. He's putting civil society back into that local leadership conversation. So we have taken a particular approach to leadership. It's not to say that other approaches don't matter. It's not to say it doesn't matter to talk about people in those very senior roles and the support they need and the development they need. But we're really interested in looking at the everyday interpersonal interactions and context. We're interested in looking increasingly at the collective, what it is that people do together that makes things happen. One of our papers is about a very, very tiny community group and how people do that, not just in formal ways, but in very informal ways as well. And so that draws attention, we think, to the issues of sector, issue and place. And James, I think it's back to you.
Yes, thank you. So stopping off points, or also known as talking a bit about the kind of research projects that underpinned some of our thinking. So on the one hand, as Carol explained, what crucially underpinned our thinking was the sort of reading, the literature reviewing, engaging with the wider debates in academia. But we also, and I would say, to be honest, we were incredibly lucky at this particular period in time to bring in a whole range of projects, externally funded on the whole, not always, sometimes they were university funded, that allowed us to kind of push forward our thinking in really practical terms. And I should say, just pausing to say another thing, I suppose Carol and I, we would probably describe ourselves as relatively conventional academics in the sense that we either involved in teaching and lecturing, particularly Carol, or research, perhaps more my side. And we seek to publish and we seek to engage with broader debates. Fidele, if I could say, is a bit more of a renegade actor. He likes to be out of the university, just as Ian was describing. He's the one who's out there all the time, shouting outside the cloisters. We're a little bit more of an ivory tower type academic, albeit ones who do our very best to kind of go out and engage and talk, and we spend a lot of time, trying our best to collaborate outside of university. So a real tribute to Fidele taking a bit of a different tack there with the directorship of CVSL in particular. So what we did, I suppose, was, and again, this is partly luck because it depends, as many of you know, who will get funded. And it's a little bit like voluntary sector organisations. They bring in lots of money, they sort of combine it, and then I would say, sort of hide the wiring to some extent. It's all sort of going on behind the scenes. But as I say, we had some fantastic projects from local projects, quite focused, specific projects, to really big projects that we were again privileged to be involved in, that were European wide. Again, this was before Brexit, so we had at least two European funded projects. One was called EU3 Leader, and the one tagged here, it was EU3 Digital, which Carol led after I'd left. And these allowed us essentially to have this really broad sweep and really broad kind of focus. Well, you can't have a broad focus, but like a really broad range of work that was happening at all different places and scales, and again exposed us to really different thinking, particularly these European projects, which brought us into contact with both academics and practitioners across Europe to think about leadership. And it sparked off all sorts of interesting reflections and debates and indeed tensions. But again, many of these were extremely collaborative, and again, despite what I said about our sort of more ivory towers perspective, we did have an incredible range of conversations with people in the sector. Some of those were recognised as being sector leaders, the big, NCVO you might think of, or Akivo, all sorts of, think tanks, etc. Thinking about how, what was happening in current debates around leadership in the sector itself. And that's partly where we were turned on to this idea of leading in between. So that came from Fozia Irfan, who we invited to do a podcast with us. We did do at least one podcast at CVSL in the early days. And she talked a lot about leading in between. Sorry, what was it?
They were webinars.
Oh, webinars, okay. Call it what you will. Again, a huge project for us was the Value of Small project, collaborating with academics at the Sheffield Hallam University and funded by the Lloyds Bank Foundation. Again, we talked a bit about foundations, a fantastic foundation who support work in this area. And this tied in so well to our focus on smaller organisations, which I suspect was why we were so successful with this project, and allowed us to really pin down some of these discussions about what is unique and valuable and distinctive about small organisations. And particularly, I would say, one of the things we were always concerned to think about was, is there such a thing as a distinctive form of voluntary sector leadership? And again, this project particularly allowed us to pursue that idea. But another thing that it allowed us to do, which was really valuable, was it took us out to different places within England and Wales, which is where Lloyds Bank Foundation operates. And in one case, it particularly took us to a part of Nottinghamshire, where we were able to do some really focused and engaged field work, and really opened our eyes to that place focus that Carol was talking about. It allowed us to learn so much about how local leaders, local voluntary sector organisations, and the people in between those organisations and spaces, including in the public sector, were working together through networks to create place-based leadership. And again, this led to many insights and further work. We're running out of time, and again tied into this broader leading. Lots of other things happening. We've touched on these already. The leadership academies were developing at the same time. We were learning from the teaching, etc. All of this has led into some of our publications, and again showcasing our fantastic new book, Reimagining Voluntary Sector Place Leadership, and the journal article that Steve mentioned earlier on. So I'm going to shut up now and pass on quickly to Carol. Where are we now?
We are talking about 9 years worth of work, and probably a little bit longer, so there's a lot we could say, but we just wanted to share some what we see as some key themes that are emerging from our review of the Place Leadership book, which is an edited book, so really diverse contributions in there. And it's really interesting as editors to review those contributions and also think back over your own work over a period of time. And these are just 3 themes that we're picking out at the moment. Again, they're huge issues we could discuss, but the first one is relationality all the way down. Oh my goodness, you know, everybody who has written in the edited book, all the work we've done coming out of that work in North Notts and beyond, deep networks. And again, you could hear the guys earlier talk about developing the networks between people and how important that is. If you're going to lead together, then those deep relational networks really, really do matter. That density of networks, I'm not sure where the phrase comes from, but I'm increasingly been talking to people about relational density. It really does matter to make things matter or make things happen. The second thing is that the spaces for voluntary sector leadership are, we think, really interesting and complex. So although we talk a lot about organisational leadership, actually our perception of, from most of the people, I mean, I don't know how many people we've spoken to over the years of doing this kind of work, but it's a lot, informally and formally. And so many people are leading in spaces, sometimes place-based spaces, so sometimes geographical, sometimes beyond geography, perhaps on an issue, but they're not confined to the organisation. So some of the conventional things that we teach in business schools about organisational leadership, they're not unimportant, but there's something beyond that is really, really, really important, I would argue, for leadership in and through the voluntary sector. So much of the work is boundary crossing. So much of it is actually in what we call in-between spaces, liminal spaces, picking up on that that debate that James quoted earlier. And those spaces, they're not new, they're not fresh. So in the work on place, we quote Doreen Massey, who talks about how place layers up over time, history and interactions, all the relationships that have gone before you, organisational interactions, personal interactions, they all layer up in a place. You don't start from nothing, do you? When you move to a place, even somewhere as fairly new as Milton Keynes, there's still a load of stuff that's gone before, which makes that place. And so when you're leading in a place, it's not only the current interactions, it's what went before as well. But I think that's also true if you join an interagency forum, for example, on child poverty, as I often have. There's so much that's gone before, it's not new. So that all that complexity is really interesting. And the third thing is that power matters. And if you've ever worked in the voluntary sector, you know that power matters, and that a lot of work in the voluntary sector is in an unequal power dynamic. And I think we're not open enough about that. That would be my argument, that actually we need to be more open about that and transparent and recognise that, particularly when we're talking the language of partnership, which kind of sounds like that and not like that. Yeah. So but then the other thing is to acknowledge strengths and to know that civil society actors would not be at these partnership tables, would not be invited to lead collaboratively if there wasn't a sense of power. So, you know, yeah. Why do these things matter? Sorry, we've run out of time, but 2 minutes we've just been given. Pressure on individuals, it's all over LinkedIn that people are under a huge pressure. It's been said already. Inclusion, I think this is just a much more inclusive way to work, to say leadership isn't just about the boss, it's about us doing things together, making things matter together. It values communities and lived experience, minority groups. Leadership development therefore needs to be facilitation and relational development. I'm running through these, I'm sure they'll share the slides with you later. There's a longer term element and there's an everyday element, relational all the way down, and what I call pragmatism with values, again, and slightly adapting Steve's work for that phrase. We've had people say to us, this is just a quote from somebody who was in one of our learning clubs some years ago with Fidele, who said, actually, it is good to be provoked into a different way of thinking by this kind of more collaborative and collective approach to leadership. We've probably got half a minute.
Yeah, just finally, I'm not going to stick to the script here, but just to say, the one thing I think we really wanted to leave you with is that we're ever conscious that there are still tensions in all of this. We never present this as being a simple thing, or that if you only do collective and collaborative leadership, that will be the answer, that will be the silver bullet. Far from it. We recognize that there are tensions remaining, and that there are and is resistance to the idea. And I guess what we really wanted to throw out there and encourage questions on, not just questions, but debate and thoughts and further contacts maybe, is that ultimately we perceive to be resistant to this idea of collective leadership, and we're not quite sure why. We think it's probably because of very traditional ideas about leaderships. People still expect and value and will ultimately pay for leadership development, which is focused on the individual, because it's about bettering oneself and ultimately, you know, in a competitive society, getting further. Leadership is also seen as, in many cases, as quite elitist and off-putting. We've lost count of the time that people say, well, I'm not a leader, even though in our conception, as we've explained, you are definitely a leader, but oh, I'm not a leader. And there is a resistance to that. So we think there is a mixture of things going on there, and we just love to encourage, as we say, feedback and thoughts on all of that, really. So yeah, thank you very much.
There's our email addresses, and don't forget our workshop this afternoon.
Indeed.
I am conscious that we are somewhat running out of time, but we probably will take one question from the audience here and one online. And no, yeah, there's no question online. We take one here, and then we move to the next phase. So anybody? Oh, yeah.
I mean, all of this is really interesting, and I'd be really, the thing I think at the forefront of my mind is, have you done kind of gendered analysis on the differences in, like you just gave the example on the conception and definition of leadership, people who don't consider themselves as leaders, and whether there is a difference in terms of whether men or women in community settings, particularly, because often, you know, the men get the titles and the women do the work, right? In many of these spaces. And so has that been done?
Not by us. That'd be the answer.
I don't know if it has. If you wanted to email, I'd be happy to have a look, see if anybody's actually written about it, but definitely understand the point you're making.
And there is a chapter in our book from a group of scholars looking at feminist conceptions of leadership. So yes, I think there has been work done on it, definitely. You'd have to refer to that chapter, which I hope you will, and it's a really good one. But there is work on feminist leadership, isn't it? It's just that we haven't particularly engaged with it.
Yeah, but that particular question about whether it is that women are less likely to self-identify as doing leadership and engaging in leadership, I'm not sure. But if you wanted to email, I'll definitely look.
Yeah. So Steve, that's the final question, I suppose. Unless there's somebody online, and then we'll move to the next phase. So the people who are going to do the lightning talks, get ready. So
switch it on.
It's on. It's on.
Hello. Hello. I'm Steve. I'm from the OU. Just curious in the term civil society. I've noticed across the years, when you're getting on a bit, you see different governments having civil society strategies, left wing, right wing. I just wondered how that fits in with the concept of CVSL across the years, and about how that might change or warp the context.
Oh gosh, that's a really good question.
I know it's a difficult question, so just some observations, really. Yeah.
I think, as I sought to explain, I think our starting point was exactly in the title. It's the voluntary sector, and it's voluntary sector leadership. So that's where we started, certainly, and then we went, as we've tried to explain, we went on the journey. I think for me, the idea of focusing more on civil society, which, by the way, I didn't have time to say, it also invokes a whole load of other sort of cultural baggage around, in particular, the fact that civil society was part of the kind of transition from Soviet states, and it was a challenge to communism, etc. And it's also talked about more in a sort of global setting. So it pushes people off in a different direction. So that's one thing. I agree with you that certainly governments have, or some governments have tended to use that terminology. And again, that's true of the third sector as well. It's pushed people around. It's sort of put people into different baskets and sent people off in different directions. As to whether how that influences CVSL, well, I think, again, Fidele's a perfect example of that. What Fidele's doing around Black leadership is very much, I would argue, civil society based, without this necessarily this focus on charities or voluntary sector leadership. So it's something else, but it's definitely within that whole web of that space, I would say. What about you, Carol?
Yeah, I'm shifting more slowly on this than James is, literally James and I probably talk most weeks about our work together, and this, we keep coming back to this debate about shall we use the term civil society. We've actually just pitched for another book, and we're pitching that as civil society because it does seem really important, actually. I think the reason I want to use voluntary sector is because I think it's so ignored in official narratives, and so I want to keep saying voluntary sector, voluntary sector, voluntary sector. I want to put it back there, but I think also at the same time the term civil society acknowledges that actually social enterprise, social entrepreneurs, there are people in lots of different spaces, particularly now, you know, with the sort of the online spaces as well, that we need to think about in a different way. And that really came,
spaces in between as well.
Yeah, and the spaces in between. It really came over in our work with European colleagues, where one of the partners is in Croatia, you know, and you're in a completely different setting, and they're talking a lot about democracy and how groups of activists promote democracy, and it's a different kind of space. So yeah, it's a really live debate between us. Maybe we need a totally new phrase. We have noticed that some people are talking about the social sector, so maybe that's, I don't know.
Oh. So James and Carol, thank you very much. And you know, what we should have asked is, when is the book going to be out, and can we meet to launch it?
We're going to meet at the Voluntary Sector and Volunteering Research Conference at Bayes Business School, September 2nd, I think.
Yes.
So
but we
join
will
us.
of course ensure that CVSL is able to.
So we may organize an event, because the whole idea was backed up here, more or less. We can appropriate it, and some of us have contributed to the book. Yeah. Okay. So thank you very much. We are moving on to the next phase now, which is going to be interesting, because we have given everybody about 5 minutes to give a lightning talk, and we start with my colleague Vangen, who is going to talk about one of our projects.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm truly privileged to standing here as a member of CVSL. My name is Wenjin Dai. I work as a senior lecturer at the Open University in the Faculty of Business and Law. I'm also a mom of 2 young kids. My elder one is 3 years and a half, and the other one is 1 year and 4 months old. Yeah, so I'm happy to talk about anything, any topic, just don't mention the word sleep. Anyway, but 3 years ago, I started my maternity leave, and during my maternity leave, it was sort of the age of sort of the time just everybody is just coming out of pandemic. So we were sort of desperate for social sorts of social interaction, and then I started to go into like a local baby groups, and that's where I got to find out the work about the Edu Cafe in the town of Newbury, about the parents' village. So this basically me, and together with 20 or 30 mothers sitting on the carpet in the local community center library, and then with crying babies surrounding us, you know, as a reflection of organization or leadership scholar. At that moment, I didn't have to notice, like, we have to, you know, this is where leadership happens. You know, this is where a group of mothers, a group of women, using their own time, coming together, want to serve other mommy friends. So this is where leadership happens. And then near the end of my maternity leave, I start to realize, as a group of like 4 mom friends, I was the only one decided to come back to work full time. At that moment, I did wonder why. And then I did some research and realized this massive motherhood penalty, just something we can't ignore with it. And I was completely shocked about the childcare, you know, cost and accessibility and, you know, inflexibility as well. So at the moment, I decided, you know, we've got to do something. So at that moment, I came back to work already. I had some really interesting conversations with my colleagues here, Fidele and Francesca. You know, like, I want to do something. We need to work with this group of people. We need to find out what other challenges are and how we can support them better. So together, we started this project. We called it Diverse Motherhoods for Work Inclusion, because we want to find out. So this is here is a group of women, mothers who want to work, but they couldn't. So we want to find out how employers, policies, and of course communities can support them better. And then that age, I remember this inspiring March with Mummies in 2022 October from the Pregnant Good, led by Pregnant Good. So it's really like I want to find out this vital supporting role that voluntary sectors are providing. So we had 2 phases of study. If you want to find out more, do join us this afternoon. And we have these toolkits. So our research were able to feed out to this momentum campaign that Open University ran, and now one of our toolkits, we have 2 kits. One of our toolkits is led by us, with the research team. So if you want to find out more, please scan that QR code, and you can maybe find more about these toolkits. And yeah, so this afternoon, we also want to look at a policy brief. We want to collaborate and co-create with you. So do join us and put your stamp on it. You know, let's make things happen together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wenjin. As I said, it's 5 minutes, and I think our next person is Daniel, who is just around the corner. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you very much, Fidele, and thanks, Wenjin, for a great start to this section. I remember that when looking at one of the early drafts for the conference, these lightning talks, lightning was spelled with an E, as in lightening, as in enlightening. So I'm going to try and be both quick and informative, which is a bit of a challenge, but yeah, we'll try it. And I've got a bit of a provocation. So a lot of my research is interested in local infrastructure organisations, so organisations in the voluntary sector that support other organisations. And the subtitle there, as you can see, is stuck in the middle. And I think these organisations do find that they get a bit stuck in the middle of lots of different challenges. So going to give a bit of provocation around that. But if you want to know more, come to my session this afternoon. We're all fighting for you. So yeah, if you're interested, come along. Okay, so as has been pointed out, CVSL's worked with lots of different organisations in lots of different ways, including local infrastructure organisations. And that's been research, delivering workshops, presentations, what we call knowledge exchange, providing different learning opportunities like the free courses, like the learning clubs that have been spoken about already. And that work's resulting in a lot of findings around loads of different areas. Bit of a flavour there in terms of trust, power. Carol mentioned power a moment ago. Ethics, leadership, obviously, the tensions involved, and more. As I mentioned, we'll cover some of those in the breakout session this afternoon. Quick look at some of the outputs. This is a blog you can access on the CVSL website, which is looking at the experience of infrastructure organisations during COVID. The article, which was about leadership and care ethics, that we published recently, that our colleague Dr. Nick Winchester led on, who can't be here today, so he's not going to do his talk on ethics. But another plug, I'm going to touch a little bit on that in my session this afternoon. So if you really were interested in that, come along. A recent report which looked at a piece of work that's really in its infancy, looking at exploring democracy in the voluntary sector. There's a report there. We did that with Voluntary Action Leicestershire last year. And again, another blog which looks at ethical leadership tensions with the example of food banks. And my colleague Liz Moody is going to talk about a bit more about this. She is over there about food banks after me in a moment. So stay tuned for that. Okay, so local infrastructure organisations, what am I going to say about them? How are they stuck in the middle? Okay, so they can be pulled in lots of different directions, and people who worked in infrastructure organisations or with infrastructure organisations will probably understand this. It's also something that applies to other organisations in the voluntary sector, but just choosing infrastructure organisations for this particular presentation. So broadly, it includes the challenge of engaging with members downwards, you would say, and decision makers, policy makers upwards. So often that's the tension that you see there. But also there's this, that's like a vertical thing with infrastructure organisations in the middle, decision makers at the top, communities at the bottom. But also there's a horizontal aspect as well about sharing information more widely, not just with members, but other communities that aren't necessarily engaged in particular issues. So these organisations can get stuck in the middle because powerful, competing, influential areas. We need to do work with our members. We also need to influence policy makers, often on behalf of those very same members. So you can see how that tension works. And some academics, Stefik and Nance there, came up with this phrase, this metaphor really of transmission belts. So infrastructure organisations being a transmission between these different things, transmitting maybe ideas from communities and needs of the communities up to decision makers so that new services can be developed. And there's a visual representation of that there, and it basically says exactly what I've just been talking about. You've got decision makers at the top, communities at the bottom, and infrastructure organisations, LIOs, in the middle, who have to engage and transmit information between those two parties. And also, horizontally, inform the wider public both about the political context in which decisions are made, so they have a role in, to some extent, justifying the decisions that are made by decision makers, but also talking to communities about political alternatives. So on the one hand saying, well, this decision was made because of this, but also saying there is an alternative and you can challenge that if you want to. So they have that dual role there as well. So really, that's kind of my pitch and summary for this afternoon. I think infrastructure organisations do have this potentially problematic role. I think there are good things and bad things about it. Some research says that these types of organisations, infrastructure organisations, can really struggle to do this type of role, despite the assumption that they can. And that's really important because the decision makers at the top often assume that voluntary sector organisations can do things that at times they can do, but at other times they really struggle to do. And that assumption can be quite dangerous sometimes if it's in policy. Capacity is an issue, as you would understand. Often policymakers, particularly public sector policymakers, try and use the voluntary sector as a way to make up for their own deficits, particularly democratic deficits within their own organisations. We see this with the rise of things like co-production or personalised approaches to care or social care, whatever it may be. They're the kinds of things that public sector organisations want to engage voluntary sector organisations with. And we see that at local levels, place-based levels, and international levels, the NGO level as well. James and Carol were talking about the difference in terminology, but that's something that stretches across those fields. One of the key things, which again I'll talk a bit more about this afternoon, is this idea of representation within this. So how do infrastructure organisations represent their communities with decision makers? And I personally think that has implications for democracy and how democracy works both within the sector and within organisations, but also how those organisations contribute more widely to democracy in society. So it's a double aspect there. I think there leads us to questions about whether the sector has a privileged position. Again, there's an assumption that it does. I'm a bit not necessarily skeptical, but I like to challenge that a little bit, because I think by questioning that, we can actually get to a better place and a more robust place for organisations that can do these things in a good way. So that's a question we can discuss again this afternoon. And yeah, stay tuned for some further research on that and also infrastructure organisations more generally. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. And so I have some good news, obviously, for the colleagues in here, but also those who are online. We may have actually some time to ask questions to the people who have been coming here and giving you some small insights into what they are doing and what is happening. So stay tuned. We'll check and see how the time is getting on. We may have opportunities for people to ask questions. Now, it is my pleasure to invite Liz to come and take the floor.
Thank you, Fidele. Thanks to everyone who's gone before for making me extremely nervous now about making this talk, because in many ways what I'd like to talk about is, I think it's fundamental to many of the challenges and the issues that people have already been speaking about. I've made a mistake in saying building bridges. This sounds like I can do this. And I do want to just start by acknowledging Anna and Julie are here, and Paul, who are here from Milton Keynes, and they are three of the people that I've been speaking to about food banks and about the potential for there being a more collaborative approach through a network of people working in food aid and food poverty in Milton Keynes. So thank you for the challenge. It's kept me awake at night. And it's led me to read a lot of interesting things. And I want to start by sharing with you a book that in many ways really provoked a lot of my thinking on the subject of poverty and hunger and food aid. So in 1998, Janet Poppendike, who's an American sociology, wrote what's now, I think, known as a seminal book on poverty and hunger. It's called Sweet Charity, Emergency Food and the End of Entitlement. And in that book, she described the massive charitable endeavour that went into distributing food packages to the hungry people of the United States. And by that, she was talking about all the food drives, the school kids, the scout organisations, the Rotaries, the church groups, all of these people and communities banding together to collect food, to store it, to distribute it, and so on. Massive endeavour. And she concluded that all of this voluntary effort that's done with compassion and really good intention is effectively creating a moral safety valve. So while the state retreats from its responsibilities and to confront and to fight for social justice, what was happening was that the public were being distracted from the failure of politicians to address more fundamental solutions to poverty. Poverty is a complex and chronic systemic problem, and many of our emergency food operations were originally intended to support people in short-term crisis, not to become this massive industry that she observed then, and which I think we can see now. So personally, I'd not heard much about food banks in the UK in 1998. Somebody spoke earlier, Steve spoke about, I think Glasgow was where you were based. So I was brought up in Glasgow, so of course I was aware of very poor people living in parts of Glasgow. I didn't consider myself to be living in poverty, but actually we define poverty in this country relative to an average income, and I probably was living in poverty, but not deprivation, not severe deprivation or anything like it. But I don't think it was until I started to see the media reports during the austerity years that I really, really appreciated this widening inequality in this country, as evidenced by the huge numbers of people seeking out food aid from food banks, massive rise in numbers of food banks emerging, and it being reported that even if people were working, they still could not support their families and feed them. So we have a welfare system, and yet the number of people seeking food aid and indeed other essential items just to live continues to rise, and it includes more people who are in work. Is that a problem? Well, hell yes, it's a problem. Poverty makes it harder to live a healthy life. It affects our educational attainment and therefore our employment, social mobility. It prevents social participation, and it reduces life expectancy. And it disproportionately affects certain groups in our society. In fact, there's an intersectionality in it. So if you're disabled, if you're a woman, if you're a child, 3 in 10 children are living in poverty in this country now. These things have kept me awake at night, but I wonder, what can I do? And it wasn't really until I started to research this area did I realise just how much the voluntary sector has stepped up, leaned in, adapted, innovated, and sadly in some cases now I think burnt out in trying to deal with this challenge. There are new, more sophisticated models of support that are offering food and many other essential household items like baby products, like financial advice, cheaper energy deals and mobile internet connection, better deals for that. The poverty industry has adopted business-like practices, deploying things like buying power, economies of scale, franchising, supply chain logistics. And in fact, the Trussell Trust, with over 1,400 food banks in its network and a mission to end the need for food banks, reported providing over 3.1 million food packages in the last year. And of that number, about over 1 million, over 1.2 million were for children. So, Feeding Britain is another large network, and they're trying to make food more affordable for all people, using all of these practices and the scale that they have. And there are literally thousands of local volunteers and donors trying to maintain a supply of food and funds to support this growing demand, and it's still growing. So, based on my own research, I have many questions. Anyone who works with me knows I always have questions. But here are a couple. I mean, is this seemingly never-ending growth in voluntary activity to support the demand, is that sustainable? As people's needs become increasingly complex, can there be solutions can the solutions that were originally intended to support people in a temporary crisis really alleviate poverty, which is a chronic problem? I don't really know the answers, but I have some suspicions, and I've got a couple of examples that are talking about what's been happening and what people are trying to do. So there's one food bank in East London that I read about that in 2023 had to close its doors. They just couldn't keep up with the demand there. It was a very unpopular decision in the community, but the staff and the volunteers, in fact, had reached burnout. And they concluded that the food bank just was not sustainable any longer. And they faced a choice of spending £100,000 on stocking up their warehouse on food, or spending it on actually transforming people's lives. And as a result of that, they established the First Love Foundation. And it was set up as their exit strategy from the food bank. You don't just switch everything off. But what they do is they take a more holistic approach to complex problems of the households that they serve, built around those households. They take a multidisciplinary approach to supporting a wide range of needs. In other local communities, and in fact, the Scottish Government have adopted the cash first model, and that's promoted by the Independent Food Aid Network. And this gives people facing financial crisis ready access to cash that allows them to actually buy food and other items to meet their needs and their preferences. And the cash comes with advice to ensure that people who have access to all the benefits they're entitled to. They can navigate our very complex welfare system. But not only that, any of the issues, the immediate issues that may have preceded the crisis that they're in at that time, they're addressed. And then for the longer term, a community support is put in place to reduce that sort of longer term risk of isolation that's so often experienced through poverty. So this is what people are trying to do. They're rethinking about what they're doing. They're taking it a step above what they've been doing as activists. And some of the principles and concepts that underpin these models, I would say, include local solutions to fit the context that people are living in. And the very necessary step of including those with lived experience in the design of those solutions. They also are underpinned by the establishment of local networks that imply collaboration between not just the volunteer groups, but also statutory agencies and funders. And they stress the importance of encouraging agency amongst their service users. Just finally, I want to return to Janet Poppendyke's view that charity and volunteering distract us from focusing on the root causes of poverty and the creation of a more equitable and just society. That's quite a big thing to say, isn't it? I wonder if volunteers and charities have a role to play in achieving social justice, which is a slightly different thing from what they are looking at now. And so what role could they play in really transforming the lives of those that they help now? I wonder if that massive endeavour that Poppendyke described could be harnessed in other ways. Perhaps to engage in something more political that may challenge authority. And as I imagine all that might entail for volunteers, I fear it doesn't seem to be compatible with the motivation, the time, and all the other reasons why people volunteer at the moment of those people I have met who are leading the good work of food banks in their communities. So I'm left wondering, how do we lead that change? Who is involved in that? What might we do? And these small but very complicated questions are what we're going to be talking about in the workshop this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. And the final speaker from this podium will be Steve, and then we'll hear from somebody who will be joining us online. I'll be introducing her shortly. Steve, over to you.
Oh, cheers, thanks. Good morning, everybody. I'm Steve Parker. I'm a lecturer in public management here at the Open University. Just as a preamble, my interest in procurement goes back. I was a social worker and a manager. So procurement in local government, procurement is something that I've sort of been involved with for many years. I've always sort of seen it as quite important, and yet with my colleagues and also in academia, sometimes it's seen very much as a bit dry. It's quite rarely researched in my own field of public management, and I believe, or I'm very of the opinion that the state would not exist without public procurement. I call it the double helix of the state. The state would not exist; it would collapse. From shipbuilding in the 1500s through sort of the welfare state, and I'm talking about the UK which is my research area. So that's the way that I see public procurement. Some colleagues very much talk about things like the hollowing out of the state by public procurement and outsourcing. I understand those debates, but I think there are different perspectives on this that are sometimes forgotten. So that's where I start. So I wanted to talk about some research that I've done recently on local government procurement, and just some considerations about what that might mean for the voluntary sector on that. So as we've heard, I mean, Alessandro Sanchino, Hambleton, I think that Carol and James were talking about that earlier, you know, the focus on place. I mean, that's very much woven into current policy. We have the devolution policy, which is ongoing, about how might we sort of put responsibilities and duties and money down to local levels of governance. And secondly, we have like the recent Public Procurement Act 2023 with its promise, which I think is key to this talk, that the Public Procurement Act, which started in February, and I've put it here, will be a key priority is to reduce barriers for social and medium-sized enterprises, SMEs, and voluntary community and organisations. So I think we're quite on topic here with a number of new policies that relate to procurement and the local government procurement level. But it's a complicated landscape, and in the paper I'll report on in a second, I've tried to sort of map that. It was not easy, and I've not seen anything like that before, because I tried to map different activities across 3 regions of England to understand them. And secondly, when I've seen public procurement discussed in the literature, it can be very technical. It lacks some of the issues that colleagues have spoken about today, like collaboration, relationships, and so on, value creation. It can become very descriptive about, for example, contract management and so on. So I think there is quite a gap between public management and local government and public procurement. And the literature that we see at the moment, I went to a recent conference in Italy with colleagues here, and most of the talks on public procurement were about things like green and sustainable procurement, measuring social value outcomes, often quite high level, you know, with quite quantitative approaches, with a lack of focus on what really goes on at the coalface. So my recent research relates to these issues, but also gives some thoughts about the voluntary sector. So just to remind you, public procurement is defined as the purchase of goods, services and works by governments and state-owned enterprises. It can be argued that we've moved from what might be called a contractual state in history to more of a professional public procurement state in the last 100 years. Obviously, public procurement is a profession in itself. And I looked at 26 documents, a small sample with my colleague Joyce Liddell, where we looked at the intentions of 3 areas of England about what local government procurement meant within their strategies. And from that, the main themes that we sort of pulled out were to try and sort of define the types of organisations in that space. And we're very much looking from the local government perspective here, anchor institutions, bodies that support local government procurement in the areas. Also collaborations between sort of different sectors, different boroughs in London, different local authorities, for example, Leicestershire and Leicester City, or not, and the politics of why people connect or not with each other. And lastly, we had a theme of what's called mechanisms. Within public procurement, there is a language of different types of contracts, framework agreements, sole procurement, joint procurement, dynamic purchasing systems. And we're interested in how these different sort of systems and mechanisms acted as what one might call a boundary spanner between these organisations, the collaborations. These practices take place, we argue, between a local and national level. You know, there's a lot of promising strategy about wanting to procure at the local level, but yet a desire to drive for efficiency at the national level. So although people can be quite boastful in their strategies about improving local social value procurement, it's sometimes, or I found it difficult to actually sort of drill down into that to see exactly what that meant. So I think there's some work there that is very important. So just some final reflections about the local voluntary sector. So my background is social work and management in local government. So I've got some sort of relationship, a long-standing relationship with understanding the wider context of that. I do think that debates about devolution, value co-creation and the Public Procurement Act are very topical at the moment in terms of trying to theorise this space and understand this space using public management theories and perspectives, which is my expertise. I made a few notes here. So that is one thing. And one of the issues, secondly, though, is that, as I'm sure you're well aware, the language of procurement is very top-down and contract-driven. It very much takes place within very sort of legislative and contractual environment, which it's fair to say clashes with the relational social value agenda. So, for example, some people I've spoken to talk about contract procedure rules as being Goliath, whereas the social value legislation is like David, that the higher contract procedure rules will always trump the lower, as it were, social value issues. So these are really important issues in discussions about the voluntary sector. I found in my research, these 28 documents, the existence of a number of fora between procurement professionals and local government where they co-create, they cluster around particular issues, maybe to do with geography or to do with the delivery of a particular service. That's interesting when we think about what that means with regard to co-creation and collaboration with voluntary sector colleagues. These are long-standing debates that have gone on, and yet there's good practice which says that one must produce trust, integrity, that there must be very positive collaboration. But yet there's other research that demonstrates that those things don't exist, leading back to the power issue that James and Carol were talking about. So a question for me is, how can local government effectively balance local social value with the voluntary sector within the framework of formal contracts on financial efficiency? This is a long-standing question and one that I think we need to continue to explore. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Steve. And last but not least, we are going to hear from Wales. Helen Thomas should be able to join us, and I believe she will be doing some slides so she can present from her end. And if there is any difficulties, obviously, we will see what we can do from our end. Over to you, Helen.
Thank you very much, Fidele. Can everybody hear me okay? I hope so. So, yes, speaking to you today from not such a sunny Wales today, which is a shame, but yeah, I just wanted to go through some of the things that we're doing in the Open University in Wales with the third sector and how we're developing our relationship with the Open University and third sector organisations. So I need somebody to move the slide on for me. It's not allowing me to share it, sorry. Somebody can move the next slide. That's it. I think I'm getting there, thank you. So we've developed a sector offer with various organisations. The lead organisation that we're working with is the WCVA, the Welsh Council for Voluntary Actions. So the overarching body that supports regional third sector councils and volunteers and charities across Wales. Where we're linking up with them is we're currently developing a strategic partnership agreement with them, soon to be signed off, she says with her fingers crossed. But it's been a long way a long process because we wanted to get it 100% right. We want to develop a partnership that not only works for the Open University in terms of progression opportunities, further learning, research opportunities, but an offer that will work for the sector and for the people that they support. So one of the projects that the WCVA are hosts for is GovOD 3. That's the leading third sector showcase, basically, that happens annually. I believe in Scotland you have the Gathering, we have the GovOD 3. It's always called GovOD 3 and I've no idea why. But GovOD 3 is where people can come together, speakers, presenters, workshops, stakeholders, influencers, Welsh Government, all sorts of organisations, as well as charitable organisations, individuals, volunteers. So it's a real eclectic but an absolutely buzzing event. The Open University in Wales is one of the sponsors. We're the gold sponsor for the event. So we also deliver a workshop every year, and we also have a stand, a stall, and do some filming, comms, digital comms, etc. around that event. We also support the Welsh Charities Awards. So again, hosted by the WCVA, the Welsh Charities Awards as a sponsor, as well as offering that sort of financial support. We judge some of the organisations, some of the awards categories. So it could be Volunteer of the Year, it could be Organisation of the Year, it could be Outstanding Contribution. Their patron is Michael Sheen, the actor, who anyone who follows Michael Sheen on social media or has heard of him will know he's absolutely awesome in the way that he supports the third sector. So it's fantastic. They've got him as a figurehead as well, and he actually turns up to these events, which is amazing. We also deliver what we call Open Learn Champions, which is an advocacy train the trainer programme. And we run that for anyone who wants to promote Open Learn, our free learning offer from the Open University, who wants to promote that to others they work with or support. We have a bespoke Open Learn Champions Train the Trainer programme for the third sector. And to date, you know, we've had hundreds of Open Learn champions. I'll give you some of the figures in a bit. We are also in the process of developing relationships with the county voluntary councils, the CVCs, and have formal partnerships with 7 out of the 19 of those at the moment. We sponsor them, their regional awards as well. So we're very sort of hands-on, as you can see. But ongoing, we also have what we call the Get Ahead with Volunteering, acronym of GOV, which is an 8-week online programme for volunteers. So I'll just tell you a little bit about that. Okay. I think it should move to the next slide, if somebody can move that for me, please. Thank you. So Get Ahead with Volunteering, created by the sector for the sector. That's the mission that we have for that. It's being co-created with the 7 CVCs, regional councils that we have as partners. It's been created by the WCVA. It's been created by OU, informed by research, created with guest presenters, including the CVSL presenters. So started back in the day with Carol, and now we have Daniel as one of the presenters on the programme. So we co-create the content and co-create the as well as the content, create the delivery as well, and undertake the delivery with them. So we have this programme. We've created it around 8 weeks. Every week, the learners who sign up for GOV will attend on teams. They have topics such as leaderships, confidence building, imposter syndrome, how to address that, how to be a better, fuller functioning volunteer. And that's not to say they're not good volunteers to start with. What it means is that we're trying to make them give them the incentive to be a volunteer that has that reach to the next step, whether it's as a volunteer manager in the future, whether it's a different role in volunteer, whether it's a career progression, whether it's into further study, or whether they want to carry on with the volunteering they're doing, but addressing some of the issues that so many of our volunteers actually have. I've been a volunteer and a volunteer myself, as well as my day job in the Open University, and I know that volunteering can actually be a very lonely place for people sometimes. So there's also a lot of volunteers on our Gov programme who are what we call volunteers that are giving back to the organisation. They're lived experience volunteers. So they might be giving back to a charity where they've been supported through an illness or a mental illness in the past, and have been supported through things like, I don't know, maybe Mind or Tenevus, or organisations that support health and well-being. So we do find that sometimes our volunteers are they're always fantastic, but we do find that sometimes they have specific elements that we can build into the course. So we're very flexible throughout the learning programme as well. So if I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. So we've been running the Gov programme for 3 years. So we now have a sustainable offer for the third sector. We have 2 intakes a year. This year we've gone up from having 1 intake a year. We usually average around 50 registrations per intake. We have done Open Learn Champions, and we have over 500 Open Learn Champions, including ones from the third sector. And we run Open Learn Champions training several times a year. We've had about 100, I think to date now it's over 150 Get Ahead with Volunteering students who've now gone on and registered with the Open University, and have also signed up to Open Learn to undertake Open Learn courses as well. We have courses that we signpost the learners to, which can be anything ranging from, as I say, something to support their well-being, dealing with imposter syndrome, or it can be specific courses such as the ones that CVSL have in their collection, courses such as using volunteering to get ahead with the job in the job market. So we have specific elements that we signpost them to, but as anyone who's used Open Learn will know, that you can actually dip in and dip out. And yeah, the trick with Open Learn is knowing when to stop with it, because it's totally just sucks you in an amazing way when you use it. We have this offer now with the third sector. We have the partnerships agreements, and what we think is a basis for a long-standing increased offer for the third sector. If I can just have, if there is another slide, or I think that might be, yeah, that's it. So if there are any questions, I'm happy to obviously hang around and can definitely answer your questions. But thank you again for the invitation, Fidele. Thank you.